Please take your seats. We're going to start. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's good to have the room in silence waiting for me and not the other way around. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be chairing the session this afternoon to consider items 5, 6, and 7 of the agenda. I would like to thank Ms. Marina von Weissenberg of Finland for chairing in a very diligent way this morning's session. I'll give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce our first agenda item for this afternoon, item 5 on invasive alien species. So, Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For item 5, the Secretariat prepared document SBSTTA-25/10, which contains a progress report on the activities undertaken by the Secretariat in response to paragraph 2, 9, and 12 of Decision 1527. The document therefore contains revised version of the annexes 1 to 6 to the same decision based on the results of the peer review and an online forum. The document also provides information on the activities of the Interagency Liaison Group on Invasive Alien Species and cooperation with other organizations. The subsidiary body is invited to consider the draft recommendations provided in the document as well as the 6 annexes that have been prepared in response to requests made on paragraph 2 of Decision 1527. In addition, the subsidiary body also has before it information document SBSTTA-25/inf/3, which contains the report of the online forum on invasive alien species. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. So as you can see, this document has a lot of work behind. The document passed already through a peer review process and also an online forum for the different annexes. As explained by the Secretariat, I'd like to highlight that the document contains 6 annexes developed by the ad hoc technical expert group upon request from COP14 and were revised following a peer review, which led to the version that is now before you. Therefore, dear delegates, in considering this document, I ask you to consider this process to which they were produced, also considering that we have 6 annexes in addition to the draft recommendation. It will be important to be very clear about the part of the document on which you are commenting. This will help the audience to understand your comments and assist the Secretariat in their efforts to capture your comments. And I remind you to submit your written comments to, the statements at @CBD.int no later than 1 hour after close of the session. I also been asked by Secretariat to ensure accurate interpretation. We ask you to remove your headset from the microphone to avoid this noise. Speak close to the microphone and speak slowly at dictation speed. So with this, Now I open the floor for interventions on item 5. I'll give the floor to Japan, followed by Finland and Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan expresses its appreciation for the efforts made by the Secretariat to prepare this document. Japan attaches great importance to the international response to unintentionally introduced invasive alien species and considers the use of sanitary and phytosanitary methods and cooperation with relevant organizations to be effective. For this reason, we welcome the progress of related efforts in the interagency group on IAS. Japan is generally supportive for the proposed recommendation. We also welcome the IPBES thematic assessment report on IAS to be used to support the planning on IAS and the implementation of Target 6 of GBF. At the G7 Hiroshima Summit, which was organized this May in Japan, G7 members committed to enhance international cooperation on measures against invasive alien species and started to work on it. As the presidency, Japan is currently leading the consultation to develop a set of recommendations by G7 members with support from the Secretariat of CBD, IPBES Secretariat, and other experts, and IUCN. Japan would emphasize the importance of enhancing collaboration in various sectors toward minimizing the negative impacts caused by IAS, especially preventing invasion of unintentionally introduced IAS. And from this point of view, we would like to propose to add the sentence in the 4A in the recommendation about the strengthening of collaboration with tourism and trade group members. In the same respect, we would like to make some text changes to the end of a small I of 4B and added especially those that facilitate international and regional cooperation. Along with some other minor changes in its annexes, we will submit our comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. So we'll look forward for those changes. We have a very short recommendation with 4 paragraphs and then the annexes. And you know the annexes were already under a very deep review. Now I'll give the floor to Finland, followed by Turkey and Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Finland has 3 major issues to be raised here under this item 5. First, referring to the draft recommendations, it is important to endorse the elements of advice and voluntary guidance, the annexes 1 to 6. These annexes include significant additional information, advice and guidance to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, in particular its Target 6. Finland would like to highlight and underline the voluntary nature of all of these advice and guidance in the 6 annexes, as it is already clearly indicated and contained in the first paragraph in each annex. We support highlighting this voluntary aspect in the draft recommendations in paras 2 and 3, as it indicates that their application can be done in accordance with national circumstances. We suggest to keep additional modifications in the annexes as limited as possible to advance and speed up the approval of these annexes here at SBSTTA-25. Secondly, Finland highly appreciates the work done by IPBES concerning the invasive alien species issues. The summary for policymakers of the thematic assessment also provides crucial background information and further justification for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and Target 6. The assessment is valuable and useful for all parties and stakeholders in implementation of the Target 6 at national level and needs to be highlighted in the draft recommendation. To reflect this, a new para to the COP 1 bis is proposed. We also propose a new para or 1 ter to encourage parties and others to make use of this IPBES assessment. Thirdly and lastly, awareness raising and understanding the threats of invasive alien species to biodiversity are key issues for combating the threats. We want to underline the need to promote awareness raising and to provide training, education and capacity building to widely use the annexes 1 to 6 and the IPBES report. For this, Finland proposes a new para in the recommendations to the COP as a 4B bis. We have modified the suggested recommendations accordingly and submitted our written comments to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Finland. So there's general support for the annexes, an invitation for not to open them, and also some concrete suggestions on the paragraphs of the recommendation, and highlighting the voluntary nature of these measures. Please take this in mind in the next interventions, please. So I now give the floor to Turkey, followed by Belgium and South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. According to the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, only one of the 4 elements in Aichi Target 9 has been accomplished, and we have only 7 years left to achieve the 6th target of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Considering the relatively short time remaining to achieve Target 6, the annexes should be in line with Target 6 and its elements in the GBF. Preventing the introduction of an invasive alien species is the most cost-effective way to combat EAS. Prevention and prioritization are crucial elements of Target 6. Therefore, annexes should be focused on identifying and managing pathways to prevent their introduction and establishment. Annexes could provide more detailed guidance on what parties should do in this regard. In order for Target 6 to be accomplished, the annexes should be further improved to include technical guides that can directly be implemented by the parties. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Turkey. Now give the floor to Belgium, followed by South Africa and Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Belgium thanks the CBD Acting Executive Secretary and the CBD Secretariat for the excellent work on the preparation of Note CBD/Substa/25/10, together with all the experts and organizations that contributed to the work. We support a recommendation to COP16 to endorse Annexes 1 to 6 of the revised voluntary guideline and advice on various matters related to invasive alien species, to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and we support Finland's suggested addition of a paragraph on the key messages of the IPBES invasive alien species assessment. As we appreciate the extensive work that has been done on the advice and voluntary guidelines in the annexes, we are ready to accept these as presented, again, as suggested by Finland. Nevertheless, if this were not to be the case, we would have a number of clarifying suggestions and a few additions to the content of the voluntary guidance and advice in the annexes, in particular Annex 6, and we have some similar suggestions on the draft recommendations, and will submit, or at least we have submitted these in writing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. So if I understand well, you are in one hand open to accept annexes as they are without opening. If we open the annexes, probably you will have many comments. But in principle, you can leave as it is, bearing in mind that these annexes already passed through peer review, an online forum, and work even from last Substa meeting as well. Thank you so much. Now I'll give the floor to South Africa, followed by Germany and Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa delivers the statement on behalf of the Africa Group. The Africa Group would like to appreciate the effort in the preparation of the note by the Secretariat on this agenda item and the process of the ad hoc technical expert group on invasive alien species. On Annex 1, Africa supports the proposed methodologies, and we believe African countries could benefit from the methodologies as they are highly impacted by invasive alien species. On Annex 2, the group notes the compounding effect that climate change has on other global change issues, hence the need to assess the impact of climate change on invasive alien species in order to understand the future trajectories and implement appropriate response measures. On Annex 3, the group believes that risk analysis for alien taxa is a comprehensive process used to determine the level of risk associated with individual species, and therefore the proposed measures in Annex 4 are welcome. On Annex 5, the group understands the need to promote information access through international databases, but is of the view that should be done while recognizing the importance of the protection of indigenous and traditional knowledge. The group also welcomes the measures highlighted in Annex 6 on additional advice and technical guidance on invasive alien species. Mr. Chair, on the draft recommendation, the Africa Group values a regional approach at both intergovernmental level and scientific or technical level when it comes to issues of invasive alien species. This is based on our experience from the IPBES assessment, where Africa was underrepresented in the assessments due to data availability challenges. This highlights the different capacity levels in different regional groupings, which call for targeted capacity initiative to strengthen regional capacities. It is our view that a regional approach would help address such regional differences. For that reason, Africa calls for regional initiatives on invasive alien species to address critical issues like data and capacity in scientific and technological aspects. Africa appreciates an open-ended as proposed in the open-ended forum as proposed in the recommendations. However, the group is of the view that such a forum should be supplemented by other engagement modalities that will allow inclusive, effective, and efficient participation from all regions, especially Africa. For that reason, the group calls for other means of engagement, including face-to-face consultations. The group also notes the reference to the One Health approach under the proposed open-ended forum to facilitate the exchange of information on approaches that can be used to facilitate a collaborative response to the threats and impacts of biological invasions, and how those individual approaches could be integrated into the One Health approach. This group believes that there is a gap in the relationship between the One Health approach and other biological approaches aimed at the management of invasive alien species, especially in Africa. It is therefore important to understand how these two relate. We will be submitting our written contributions on this agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. On behalf of African states, I'll give the floor to Germany, followed by Switzerland and Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Germany would like to thank the Executive Secretary for the organization of the peer review process, including the open-ended online forum on Annexes 1 to 6. We welcome the preparation of the present peer-reviewed Annexes 1 to 6, which now provide important advice and voluntary guidance to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal GBF, in particular its Target 6 as well as other relevant targets. We support the content of the annexes and hope that they will be recommended for adoption during Subsidiary-25. We remain committed to maintaining scientific rigorousness, and we encourage to continue and strengthen collaboration between the CBD Executive Secretary and the IPBES, which in our view may strengthen, highlight and support the work and outputs carried out by each of the bodies. In this view, we would like to underline once more the outstanding scientific work, the dedication and the great efforts by the leading authors and co-authors of the thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control, and of the summary for policymakers, which has been approved earlier this year. We are confident that the adoption of the Annexes 1 to 6 will contribute to further improve our knowledge on invasive alien species, as well as our management actions to minimize their impacts. We will hand in some small comments on the recommendations in writing, and we agree with what was said by Finland and Belgium on the voluntary nature and that the annexes should not be opened again, but if it is necessary, that changes on the annexes should be as limited as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I still hearing support for annexes as they are. and some amendments to recommendations so far. Now I'll give the floor to Norway, followed by Gabon and Canada. No, Switzerland, sorry. Yeah, you already talked.
Thank you, Chair.
Norway, followed by Gabon and Canada. Sorry.
Switzerland is here, Mr. Chair. I think you skipped us with Germany. But as I have the floor, I'll carry on if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please, Switzerland. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Switzerland welcomes the summary for policymaker of the thematic assessment on invasive alien species approved by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services at its 10th session. Switzerland suggests highlighting the importance of the summary for policymaker by endorsing the publication and encouraging parties and relevant stakeholders to make use of the key messages when updating, revisioning, and implementing their MBSAPs. To this purpose, Switzerland, and similarly as Finland and Belgium, suggest the inclusion of 2 new paragraphs, 1 bis and 1/3, that was shortly submitted in writing. Furthermore, Switzerland thanks the ad hoc technical expert group for its work on the and the executive secretary for having organized a peer review process to solicit advice on annexes 1 to 6 to the decision 14/11 and welcomes the revision of said annexes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Thank you. Now it's Norway, followed by Gabon and Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Norway supports the main points in the recommendation of this item. As Belgium and others, we think the annexes referred to in point 2 have now been sufficiently developed and updated in relation to the Kunming-Montreal framework and can be adopted without further changes. These documents, together with the assessment on invasive alien species from IPBES, will be a useful basis for efforts on Target 6 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. As regards point 4.4b, on an online forum linked to Target 6 of the framework, Norway would like to suggest that these discussions be more directly linked to the findings of the IPBES report and how these findings can contribute to the implementation of Target 6. This can be reflected through some small text revisions in point 4.4b, which we have submitted in writing to the Secretariats. Norway would also like to propose that based on the findings of the IPBES report, the parties could be encouraged to submit proposals on further measures to achieve Goal 6. The input could be made available before the online forum is arranged, and a summary of the submitted proposals, as well as the discussions in the online forum, should form the basis for discussions on further recommendations on measures to achieve Target 6 of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Gabon, followed by Canada and Spain.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gabon supports the declaration made by South Africa on behalf of Africa. We also support the draft recommendation included in document CBD-Subsidiary 2510 and welcome the quality of the annexes. Given the fact that this is a voluntary aspect, we do not wish to make any comments on the annexes. These annexes show the importance of having standardized coordinates which are updated and which are of high quality. In that regard, Gabon believes that the operationalization of that activity requires long-term financing provisions, and justly, Gabon believes that in order to have such long-term financing, this should be reflected in the draft decision itself. Furthermore, Gabon notes the necessity of carrying out impact evaluations on all of the alien invasive species known to date. This will allow us to provide parties with detailed information which will support the hierarchization of the species in accordance with Target 6. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Gabon. Canada, followed by Spain and New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair.
Canada supports welcoming the IPBES thematic assessment of invasive species and their control and its summary for policymakers, as well as the associated recommendations that can be found under Agenda Item 4. Canada supports bringing all or some of the recommendations from Item 4 into this agenda item. Canada appreciates the work that has been undertaken by the Executive Secretary with the Interagency Liaison Group on IAS on the annexes and supports the voluntary guidance. Overall, we are very pleased with the review process and the changes that have been made. If the annexes are opened, we could propose a few changes, but again, we are pleased with the text and support it. We support it being presented to COP16 for adoption. Canada also supports the Executive Secretary continuing to enhance collaboration with other international organizations through the Interagency Liaison Group. Canada would support adding references to the findings of the IPBES thematic assessment of IAS as the group pursues its assessment of existing capacity and scientific and technical needs. Furthermore, Canada would support referencing work the group is already planning to do on a draft proposal to the Economic and Social Council's Subcommittee of Experts on the Transport of Dangerous Goods on a globally harmonized labeling system for consignments of environmentally hazardous living organisms or propagules. Finally, with regards to the open-ended online fora proposed, Canada wants to avoid the duplication of work and believes that work carried out towards the implementation of Target 6 is better suited under the existing work laid out for SBI. Canada can be flexible on the other forum or alternate ways to share information amongst parties and organizations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Spain, followed by New Zealand and Brazil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Spain welcomes the information provided in document CBD-Subsidiary-2510, and in order to support its implementation in the context of biodiversity, welcomes as this draft decision the decision 1527 and the revision of the annexes 1 to 6 to the decision, and from a voluntary aspect to consider invasive alien species, despite the need to have more exhaustive information. We'd like to suggest some amendments, both in the recommendation as well as in the content of the annexes 1 to 6. And amongst these, the inclusion of messages that were present in annexes 1 to 6 in the decision of COP 1527, but which were eliminated at one stage, as well as other messages proposed during the online forum, which were not captured in the new draft of these annexes. Spain would like to propose a number of changes in order to harmonize the terminology of the annexes 1 to 6 with that of the evaluation of the IPBES themes on invasive alien species and their control, by strengthening the links between the voluntary orientation that's reported in the annexes and the Target 6 on biodiversity, and to underline, to complement and define some of the most relevant messages of those guidelines. The specific proposal on amendments will be given in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you. Thank you so much, Spain. I have heard in the general support expressed to date to not open the annexes, and therefore I need to know whether the room would like us to reopen the annexes or not. They were thoroughly revised, and I would like to hear opinions both in favor I have about 30 requests for the floor at this point. And I think this should also be taken into account. If it is in favor, then please be very, very brief. And that was the original decision. And we will see how we can proceed. I give the floor to New Zealand, followed by Brazil, and then the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. As the greatest threat we face to our biodiversity, Aotearoa New Zealand places great importance on strengthening biosecurity and tackling established invasive species. We warmly welcome the IPBES thematic assessment on this topic and take particular note of the recommendations around the ambitious progress that can be achieved through closer collaboration and coordination on invasive alien species across countries and sectors. New Zealand considers alignment of strategic actions and policies, information sharing, and international collaboration in innovation, research and development is key to achieving Target 6. This needs to address existing problems and also prepare for future challenges likely to emerge alongside global megatrends such as climate change, under which harmful invasive species like the yellow crazy ant have increasing opportunities to extend their ranges. International initiatives that bring together funders, policymakers, and research providers support the development of solutions that can transcend national boundaries and circumstances, supporting capacity building and driving innovation. The assessment summary notes that international and regional partnerships can also help to improve management of biological invasions, and here we emphasise that collaboration and co-development with Indigenous peoples and local communities can increase the effectiveness of implemented strategies. As with others in the Pacific region, New Zealand is acutely aware of the profound impacts of invasive alien species have on social and cultural values, including contributing to inequity through disproportionate impacts on Indigenous and vulnerable people. Understanding and demonstrating the social and cultural value of biodiversity supports us to prioritise efforts to achieve Target 6 to deliver the greatest benefits to both nature and people. There are several references within these annexes on the use and collection of traditional knowledge. These terms can have extractive connotations, which creates uncertainty around who is using the knowledge and what it may be used for. It also raises questions around the role that Indigenous peoples and local communities may be playing in decision-making processes around the use of that knowledge. Should the annexes be opened, it would be our preference that we could use language that empowers Indigenous peoples and local communities to participate in the decision-making process and contribute their knowledge where they feel it is most appropriate. New Zealand has some proposed minor text amendments to reflect this preference and will provide in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucila. I'll give the floor to Brazil, followed by UK and Sweden.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the work done on further implementation of Target 6 on invasive alien species. We understand some elements within the annexes still require improvement, and we would highlight that the peer review process does not replace the need for party and consensus-driven discussions. We support measures related to the sharing of information, communication, and dissemination of information as essential to further advance in the work in this area. On the maintenance of efficient, timely, and high-quality, up-to-date, standardized data and information for the management of invasive alien species. We strongly support the need for knowledge and data sharing to be free and open-sourced and to overcome language and cultural barriers, taking into consideration the specific needs of developing parties and challenges in having access to information. On the draft recommendation for the COP, we are ready to welcome the IPBES thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control. As for the elements of guidance developed on the basis of the work of the ad hoc technical expert group, we believe the text should clearly indicate that they are voluntary in nature and must be implemented in accordance with relevant international obligations, in particular those provided by the World Trade Organization. On Annex 1, we would firstly indicate Brazil has developed a list of priority invasive alien species for early detection and prevention based on a multi-criteria analysis. Therefore, we recognize the benefits of the approach, Nevertheless, we are of the view that a cost-benefit analysis based on monetary values is not adequate, given that current methodologies are not well developed and would not lead to an accurate evaluation. We believe the cost-effectiveness analysis is a more appropriate approach. On Section 3 of the same annex, on further considerations for the management of invasive alien species, we are of the view that decisions and risk analysis should be based on science, while when possible, at the same time, consider indigenous knowledge systems. On Annex 2, on suggested actions for national and subnational authorities and border agencies, the establishment of mechanisms to address the risk associated with the introduction of alien species should be focused on e-commerce and done in cooperation with relevant organizations, instead of focusing on commodities of concern, which would either restrict the work or pose an additional challenge to ascertaining such focus. On stakeholders' engagement, we should not qualify or be overly prescriptive on which stakeholders should be involved. On suggested actions for relevant international organizations, bodies, or agreements, including standard-setting organizations, we are of the view that we should build upon the mentioned frameworks as the environmental impact classification for alien taxa. But we are not in a position to agree to the development of an international labeling system, given that it may lead to distortions in trade. On Annex 3, the application of modeling measures should be extended to all countries and not only developing countries. On climate change, we should include more precise language and references. Finally, on Axis 4, we should distinguish risk analysis from socioeconomic and cultural information, being these of a voluntary nature. In this sense, we believe the mentioning of the guidance on Article 26 is inadequate, and we will be making specific comments on that in the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Now I'll give the floor to UK, followed by Sweden and Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Secretariat, for producing this document which captures the progress made since COP14 on addressing the issue of invasive alien species. The UK is grateful to see the updated guidance featured in the annexes, and we were pleased to take part in the peer review process along with many other parties and observers. Firstly, in agreement with Finland and a number of other countries, we strongly support the annexes being endorsed in their current form, recognising the wealth of useful guidance and advice they contain, which parties can take forward and use when implementing their NBSAPs. We respectfully urge fellow parties to recognise that these annexes have undergone peer review and not to open the guidance for negotiations at this meeting. While we acknowledge the potential for further amendments, we believe that spending time on them will divert time better spent on more pressing agenda items that really do require our further discussion. Secondly, the draft decision presented in item 5 includes useful activities that will aid implementation of Target 6. The decision also welcomes the IPBES thematic assessment and recognises its importance in Target 6 implementation. We note that the draft decision in document 25.8 under item 4 on the review of findings from the IPBES thematic assessment also contains actions to aid Target 6 implementation and an encouragement to make use of the information contained in the thematic assessment. To efficiently address this overlap, we propose that the two decisions be combined into a single decision on invasive alien species. This one decision would become the basis for future work to support the implementation of Target 6, including embedding the further consideration and use of the IPBES findings in this work. To make progress at this present meeting, we propose that the Executive Secretary kindly prepare one draft decision that combines the two decisions currently found under items 4 and 5, and that they then present it to this meeting as a conference room paper for parties to consider. The UK has submitted a draft combined decision to illustrate how this could be formulated. We believe our proposed approach of combining all actions into one decision would outline a clear path forward for future work under the invasive alien species agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK, and thank you for your suggestions. So far, we've been considering IPBES in a package because there are similar ways to agree on the assessments. In the case of invasive species, there is this connection, but I'm not sure about the other ones. But let's be flexible and maybe also Secretariat can consider this point. But meanwhile, we're taking care of the work on the annexes and the recommendation as well. Now I'll give the floor to Sweden, followed by Netherlands and Iraq.
Thank you, Chair. Sweden takes note of the document SBSTTA-25/10. We welcome the results from the various initiatives carried out by the Secretariat regarding invasive alien species, such as the peer review of the annexes, and express our appreciation to the Secretariat for these activities. Sweden also welcomes the EPES thematic assessment report on invasive species and their control, and its summary for policymakers. Sweden would like to see the key messages of the report as relevant for the implementation of the GBF, particularly Target 6, better reflected in the proposed recommendations for a decision, and makes some suggestions in writing. Sweden supports the recommendations for COP16, which foresee to endorse the revised annexes 1 through 6, advising on various matters related to invasive alien species, to support the implementation of the GBF. Sweden realizes the voluntary nature of the advice and voluntary guidance presented. Should annexes be opened, Sweden supports a new paragraph 4 bis to Annex 3 to address the emerging risk for the spread of invasive alien species via new global transport and shipping routes that may be established due to the impacts of climate change and the loss of permanent sea ice in the Arctic region. This suggestion will be submitted in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. Now I'll give the floor to Netherlands, followed by Iraq and Vanuatu.
Thank you very much for the floor, Mr. Chair. The Netherlands welcomes the publication of the IPBES report on invasive alien species and is in favor of endorsing its summary for policymakers for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as to invite parties and others to make use of these key messages of the summary for policymakers. The Netherlands supports the recommendation that foresees at COP16 the endorsement of the annexes 1 to 6 of the revised voluntary guidance and advice on various matters related to the invasive alien species. Again, also to support the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. While the Netherlands supports the annexes in general, one issue has arisen and that really needs to be addressed. And this is referring to Annex 6. The Netherlands is of the opinion that the scope of the International Plant Protection Convention should not be expanded beyond its mandate, and that it's also not the mandate of the CBD to suggest this. Therefore, the Netherlands proposes a small change to paragraph 3b of Annex 6, and to add at the end, in line with the mandate of relevant conventions. The Netherlands underlines the importance of the precautionary approach and recognizes the importance of the One Health approach regarding biodiversity and invasive alien species, and appreciates that these are reflected in the documents. In line with Belgium, Finland, Canada, Germany, and others, if the annexes will be further discussed, the Netherlands will send in a few comments regarding Annex 1 and Annex 6 in writing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'll give the floor to Iraq, followed by Vanuatu and France.
تحية طيبة. تماشيا مع المقرر 15/27.
Thank you very much. As was done in the context of Resolution 1522 on the management of alien invasive species, as well as the decisions that have been taken in the context of international organizations and with a wish to raise conscious awareness about ecosystems and safeguarding and preserving biodiversity and sound management of alien invasive species with the participation of the relevant communities. And in order to avoid this type of species and to have control over them, as well as to study them, particularly those which can adapt to other climates, we require a certain number of expert systems in place, expertise, using different languages so that we're able to collect the relevant information by experts and carry out studies and make scientific recommendations that we have the relevant technology, the biotechnology, and use it and exchange such technology with the means necessary in order to modernize the system of, for example, irrigation systems. Exchange of information is very important, the exchange of successful experience, and to work in the context of innovation or using this type of system. This will allow us to be able to complement the information that we have on the basis of our experience, and in that way to have control over invasive alien species. Thank you.
Thank you, Iraq. Now I'll give the floor to Juanato, followed by France and Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vanuatu is speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island countries present here at SBSTTA-25, Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Vanuatu, Tuvalu, and would like to align ourselves with New Zealand. Mr. Chair, invasive alien species are undoubtedly a serious threat to our islands with highly vulnerable ecosystems. They have a significant impact on our ecosystem's resilience, leading to a loss of production in ecosystem services and a reduced ability to adapt to climate change. As we speak, our people are suffering economic, cultural, nature loss, and spread of diseases from invasive species, in particular the coconut rhinoceros beetle, Myrmea peltata, and rats.
Can you speak slower, please, for interpreters to follow you? Thank you.
Regional tracking of Pacific Island countries and territories have identified major gaps in scope and volume of management actions is currently underway. Mr. Chair, we would like the Secretariat to note the following. We welcome and support the recommendations under CBD-Live/25/10 invasive alien species, as well as the IBES thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control. Pacific Island countries have limited technical, technological, and financial capacity to carry out early detection and rapid response to invasive species introductions. In this regard, we call on the Secretariat and organizations and other partners to work with us to develop these critical capacity needs. While we work on strengthening our border control measures, we would like to call on developed countries to strengthen their border controls while facilitating international trades to Pacific Islands. Prevention of introduction of IAS is the first in line of defense. We would like to request for the inclusion of nature-positive methods for controlling and managing the invasion of IAS. Mr. Chair, we believe that effective prevention measures depend on adequate and sustained funding, of which we feel there should be an additional paragraph D under recommendation 4 to reinforce the need for financial resources to support PIGS needs for capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, transfer of technology, monitoring, and so forth. Therefore, we have minor changes to the recommendations for parties to consider in line with Article 26 on financial resources. We will submit our changes to the text in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Juanat. Just to let you know, still about 20 parties asking for the floor. To be very precise in your comments, I hear a lot of support for recognition of IPBES assessment, some amendments to the recommendations, many comments to not to open the annexes, some indicating that if annexes are open, they have some comments, and also a reminder that these are voluntary guidance. This is my recollection so far. I'll keep listening to parties, and we need to allow also for observers. Please remind that we still have 2 more documents for this session, so I count with your support to be very concrete in order to take a decision in how to proceed with this document. Meanwhile, I'll give the floor to France, followed by Sudan and EU.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. France welcomes the draft decision, in particular the inclusion of considerations on including One Health, and welcomes all of the work that's been done on the annexes as well. We're very satisfied with the content of these annexes and believes that all of the work that's already been carried out including the proposal by Finland for the adoption of the annexes in their current version. However, if these annexes are opened up, then France would like to be able to have some of the elements better reflected. We would like to highlight the importance of scientific research, not only to enrich the database with lists of species and the place in which they occur, but also places in which they occur, but also to improve our knowledge on these invasive alien species themselves and their relationship with biodiversity in order to better understand the phenomenon of their propagation and establishment in other places. It would also seem important to us to support scientific research in order to better understand the results of this strategy for management that we're contemplating putting in place in order to achieve Target 6 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Strategy, in order to avoid negative impacts on biodiversity caused by control and eradication actions of invasive alien species. France would like the presence of experts on the species concerned to be better reflected in the guidelines, and that would seem to us to be fundamental in order to avoid any confusion amongst the targeted species and the native species. The global assessment by IPBES on invasive alien species has showed clearly the considerable importance of prevention to control the impacts of invasive alien species in marine areas. And in that context, the development of an international convention on the biofauna is very important as far as France is concerned. With regard to the database, France would like also that the importance of interoperability amongst the current existing databases is taken into account as we set out standards, and for this to be better reflected. We will put all of these points in writing and pass them to the Secretariat. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, France. Now I'll give the floor to Sudan, followed by EU and Malawi.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you so much, sir. Sudan would like to back South Africa on behalf of the African Group. We'd like to convey our gratitude to the Secretariat for having prepared this document, which is a very important one. A document which provides a scientific framework for what we are doing. We back the methodology of this assessment. Sir, the Africa region suffers from this type of invasive alien species. This is one of the greatest threats to biodiversity. And to understand the situation is challenging. A major improvement of human health and animal health and biodiversity hinges on understanding this correctly. This information, this knowledge, is something which prompts us to cooperate and to carry out our scientific research together by pooling our efforts. And this, of course, will require capacity building, because the participation of Africa in this Africa was not at the level at which it should have been. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudan. Now EU, followed by Malawi and Mexico.
Thank you, Chair. The European Union supports the endorsement of the Annexes 1 to 6 of the revised voluntary guidance and advice on various matters related to invasive alien species to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We remind of the voluntary nature of the advice and guidance in the 6 annexes. We would like to see a reference to the IPBES assessment on invasive species to be included in the draft decision on this matter. We have a number of suggestions for amendments to the proposed draft recommendation and also to the annexes if they will be discussed, in line with the report of the experts meeting on the island of Wilm, available on the website of this meeting. We will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the brief intervention. Please, I invite you not to make comments on how important are invasive species. We've been working in the convention with invasive species for years and years, and we have a small set of different activities reflect on the different annexes, so we're not departing from zero. I will appreciate if your comments go straight about the recommendations and the annexes. I count with your support. Now I'll give the floor to Malawi, followed by Mexico and Egypt.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi would like to align itself with the statement made by South Africa on behalf of Africa. We welcome the draft recommendation on the IP-based thematic assessment report on invasive alien species. Malawi believes that the technical and scientific cooperation at both global, regional, and sub-regional level is very important in addressing issues of invasive alien species, and we have proposed additional paragraph to address this issue. We support the proposal made by Finland in relation to capacity building, communication, education, and public awareness. We have prepared a draft test on this in the additional paragraph, and also some new additional text to paragraph 4. With regards to 4B, we support what South Africa indicated in regards to supplementing the open-ended forum with other engagement modalities to enhance participation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Mexico, followed by Egypt and Morocco.
Gracias, señor presidente. México considera pertinente
Thank you so much, sir. Now, we believe that it is important to stress the risk assessments. One has to look at all of the modalities incorporated in this risk assessment as contained in the document. We therefore have to take into account not only of what is in the introduction, but also what is found further down in the document. We also believe that the database is extremely relevant. We're going to have to try to normalize things as much as is possible to facilitate the exchange of information for good management of invasive alien species. Mexico backs the recommendations contained here. We'd also like to back what was proposed for the analysis of costs and benefits, profitability, and multiple criteria which can be involved in the management of additional risks associated with electronic transboundary commerce and trade of living organisms. We back what was said for the invasive alien species, and we'd also like to back what is proposed regarding the exacerbating factors related to climate change. We believe that this is of fundamental importance, and we cherish the hope that we'll be able to continue to cooperate with the interinstitution group on invasive alien species to continue the implementation of Objective 6. So we therefore back what was said by the United Kingdom and Germany, and we call upon all of our colleagues to have them promote the implementation of these voluntary measures. We, of course, are going to share with you all of our proposals in writing. Thank you so much.
Morocco and Burundi.
Egypt fully support statement given by South Africa on behalf of Africa at large. Mr. Chairman, CBD has a very long history that deal with invasive species. We have too many decisions, we have too many guidelines, we have too many educational, we have too many things. Are we going to continue talking and talking, whereas biological invasion is happening all the time until a disaster will happen, especially when it comes to the climate change? We urge all participants here not to open the floor for discussion, especially these annexes, because we will wait until COP17 and then we cannot report by 2030. So we have to be very careful. Certainly the advice and guidance with their own elements are very, very good, so we encourage people to make use of them. Mr. Chairman, we would like to support the statement given on by UK to combine the two decisions in one to make it very, very simple. Otherwise, it will complicate the whole things. And I don't want to talk too much about welcoming and voluntary guidance and whatever, but certainly we agree with your vision not to open the floor. At the same time, all of the issues are very clear to us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Egypt. And I'll give the floor to Morocco, followed by Burundi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chair. Morocco wishes to back the statement made by South Africa, made on behalf of the African Group. We have taken note of the annexes to the draft decision and the methods and analyses contained therein, which are guidelines, technical guidelines for the management of invasive alien species in a number of sectors. For this reason, and given the volume of the annexes, Morocco proposes examining the possibility of gathering all of these technical guidelines in the form of a guide, which will, of course, improve all of the various stakeholders taking ownership of the project. We also believe that it would be good to, as part of the working process which is currently underway, to look at the results of the recent IPBES assessment regarding invasive alien species. Furthermore, Morocco strongly backs the proposal of convening an online forum, an open-ended online forum, to facilitate the exchange of information regarding the results of the work carried out, but also regarding the various initiatives aimed at fighting against diseases, zoonotic diseases caused by parasites and exotic species. We have here the PRESOD initiative, which Morocco and a number of African states are all members of. And finally, the Kingdom of Morocco wishes to encourage further technical cooperation as well as scientific cooperation as effective tools for fighting against invasive alien species. And we believe that it is important to stress the ways in which support can be provided for the elaboration of national strategies on invasive alien species, including the need to strengthen capacities of national institutions responsible for this field. And finally, and as was requested during the previous session, we had already uploaded our contribution on the relevant website. Thank you.
Thank you, Morocco. I'll give the floor to Burundi, followed by Seychelles.
Merci.
Thank you so much, sir. Burundi wishes to back the statement made by the African Group on invasive alien species, which was made by South Africa. Burundi finds very useful the Secretariat's note on this point and wishes to commend the special group of technical experts on invasive alien species for the work already accomplished. Indeed, we are currently noting that invasive alien species are increasingly becoming a threat to both ecosystems and biodiversity, and we suggest that they need to be, or that we suggest that in Annex 4 we should have two measures focused on collaborative, cooperative approaches rather than being just voluntary. Thank you.
Thank you, Burundi. Now I'll give the floor to Seychelles, followed by Peru and Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. Seychelles supports the statement made by South Africa on behalf of Africa. We appreciate the effort of the Secretariat on the preparation of this document. Seychelles also welcomes the IPBES thematic assessment on invasive alien species, especially on the findings of the impacts of invasive alien species have on island ecosystem. Invasive alien species is one of the major causes of biodiversity loss for island ecosystems. This is why Seychelles welcomes the annexes. Annex 1, as we believe appropriate methodologies can provide effective management action towards invasive alien species. Annex 3 on the linkages between climate change, invasive species, and other global changes, and that due to vulnerabilities of island ecosystems to climate change, the prevention and management of invasive alien species can become a greater challenge. We understand that climate change modeling and foresight exercises can be useful. However, there is a need to build capacity to undertake these modeling exercises. And Annex 6 on additional advice and technical guidance on invasive alien species management, especially the management measures of specific pathways. Due to our high dependency on trade, it brings with it risks of possible new invasive species. Thus, the importance of international and regional cooperation to minimize the risk of the spread of invasive alien species. The draft recommendation is a good basis for discussion, but we would like to state that capacity building, technical, scientific cooperation, and technology transfer and financing are the main constraints, especially to small island developing states, to effectively prevent and manage the spread of invasive alien species. We will submit our written comments to this agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Seychelles. Now I'll give the floor to Peru, followed by Colombia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor to speak on behalf of Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, Mexico, and Cuba, Venezuela, Antigua and Barbuda, and Peru. We welcome the document. We support the comments that are contained within it. The annexes seem to be clear with regard to the guidelines and the management of invasive alien species and their contribution at a global level.
Tanto a nivel institucional,
and this should be carried out at regional and global as well as national level. The accessibility and the normalization of the formatting of the data and the analyses of the activities in terms of control of invasive alien species should be examined. The analysis of costs, the benefit-cost ratio, and the identification and minimization of risks associated with electronic transborder trade and the minimization of its effects, analysis of potential risks, negative impacts of invasive alien species on the ways of living or the health of indigenous peoples and local communities, and the potential effect of its socio-economic effects on cultural diversity. One of the matters relating to invasive alien species and risks associated to climate change and other global changes, the management of information for control of invasive alien species, particularly access to data for decision-making based on evidence is important. We also believe that it's important to institute strategies to carry out undertakings with invasive alien species and to increase collaboration amongst parties, governments, and all stakeholders which are relevant to this theme. And finally, taking into account that one of the potential effects of climate change on invasive alien biological species, it's important to promote the assessment by IPBES and that these have been incorporated in the way in which they're applied to other conventions as we find synergies which will allow us to reduce risks and impacts of invasive alien species. As Peru, we would also like to highlight the importance made by the Executive Secretary to propose a decision to the experts group on hazardous waste, on a system of labeling that's harmonized throughout the world of live dangerous organisms and their inclusion under 2.9, Class 9 of the legislation of the United Nations. We think that this will be very useful for the management of invasive alien species. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, thank you, Peru. Let's concentrate on the recommendations here and whether there should be any comments and reopening of the annexes. I note that Colombia was already spoken on behalf of, but I now give the floor to Colombia as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's just to add to what was said by Peru, I would like to mention that Colombia is working on its national plan for the prevention and proper control of invasive alien species, and this process requires strengthening of technical and financial aspects, as was mentioned by Pearl, speaking on behalf of the group. We'd also like to see technical and financial assistance so that we can carry out the guidelines that were recommended by the technical experts on invasive alien species. And we would like to highlight the fact that Colombia has had experience with these species, and we have made progress in terms of the knowledge and assessment of risks. And with that experience, we've been able to identify some new alternatives that give us opportunities for those communities which are involved. And these we have some more detailed comments which we will present to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor, says the Chair, to Indonesia, followed by Bangladesh.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia would like to appreciate the work of Secretariat and also all experts in the AHTEC on this agenda item, and welcome the work of IPBS on the thematic assessment report on the invasive alien species. Indonesia also supports the endorsement of the annexes 1 to 6 for the management of invasive alien species. In our views, IS management also necessitates regional collaboration with the other countries that also face similar challenges. Thus, we support regional approaches as also stressed in the annex. As the current presidency of the ASEAN, Indonesia is taking a lead role at the regional level to reduce the adverse impact of IS toward biodiversity through the initiation of the ASEAN Action Plan for IS Management, with support from ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. This plan outlines several priority areas for action and aims to promote a regional approach to managing invasive alien species that recognizes the interconnectedness of the region's ecosystem and the need for the coordinated response to prevent and introduction of spread of invasive alien species. By working together, ASEAN member countries can protect the region's biodiversity, environment, and economic development. We will submit our full intervention to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Perry McCarthy, Indonesia. Now I'll give the floor to Bangladesh, followed by Chile.
Thank you, Chair. Alien invasive species in all three ecosystems have been rightly identified as the direct drivers of biodiversity loss in GPF. From One Health perspective, AIS may also have potential impact on human health. We believe that early detection, eradication, and/or management in a coordinated manner is the best possible option that has been reflected here in this document. Bangladesh appreciates the outstanding work done by IPBES and believe that AIS assessment report of IPBES will be very helpful for AIS control and management. However, Bangladesh supports the comments of South Africa, Netherlands, and some other country. My specific comment to add on paragraph in Annex 2, Roman 1, under the headline, suggested actions for national and sub-national authorities and border agencies. The paragraph is country-specific on health joint plan of action in line with global joint plan of action adopted by quadripartite, including UNF, would be a good option for the parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh. Now I'll give the floor to Chile, seguido de Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Invasive alien species are considered one of the 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss, and the GBF, through its Target 6, give us the needed direction to move forward in management and policy, highlighting not only the mainlands, but also in priority areas such as islands ecosystems, a relevant context for the high endemisms that Chile presents or has. Chile has revised and supports the annex presented and appreciates the work developed through the online forum. Chile also supports what has been mentioned by many other parties about not opening the annexes for discussion. Chile would like also to thank and recognize the work developed and published by IPBES on the thematic assessment on invasive alien species. This assessment provides relevant recommendations for management and policies, coordination, research, and innovation, and is an important support for the commitment of GBF Target 6. We support and invite other parties to accept and incorporate these recommendations in the future work and management. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gracias, Chile.
Thank you, Chile. I now give the floor to Argentina. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Argentina thanks the Secretariat for the preparation of document CBD-Subsidiary-25 on invasive alien species. In that line, we would also like to thank the technical experts group's work on invasive alien species. Argentina would like to suggest that the group take note of the IPBES report on invasive alien species, the assessment made by IPBES on invasive alien species, and the information and the work carried out on invasive alien species, and the fulfillment of Target 6 of the framework. At the same time, we take note of the elements for guidelines which have been drawn up on the basis of the work of the AHEG on invasive alien species. Argentina considers it necessary for the risk assessments regarding the impact of invasive alien species be carried out on the basis of science in accordance with the WTO guidelines, in particular the agreement on the phytosanitary and sanitary arrangements. In that regard, we would like to suggest the inclusion of the sentence science-based, and after all of the mentioned risks, all of the risks that I have just mentioned. On the other hand, in line with what was established and in the international framework on biodiversity and the global framework, and we would like to have the mention of the capacities and an explicit reference to developing countries as well. In conclusion, Argentina would like to make many comments on the annexes and will pass them to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Argentina.
Thank you so much, Argentina. I now give the floor to the representative of IPLC, followed by ONC Women.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hold on. I speak on behalf of the IFB. The IFB is disappointed that there is no language in the main decision that mentions the role of indigenous peoples and local communities, although their role in taking actions and the value of their traditional knowledge and their particular vulnerability is mentioned in the annexes. Given the reluctance to open the annex, we propose the following language to further elevate our role in risk analysis in the main recommendations, building on COP6 Decision 623 that introduced cultural issues into the definition of risk analysis in regards to invasive alien species. In Recommendation 2D on risk analysis, we propose adding at the end of the sentence, cultural values as contained in Annex 4, comma, including with the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. And we also support mentioning the summary for policymakers of the IPBES Thematic Assessment Report on IAS. We have uploaded proposals for small changes in the annexes and call for party support for any or all of them. And again, we look for party support for adding this, including the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in 2D. Thank you.
Thank you, IPLCs. I would like to see if there's any party supporting these amendments proposed. I see Gabon. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to IUCN and last speaker, representative of women.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned under Agenda Item 4, IUCN very much welcomes the IPBES assessment on invasive alien species. In addition to the recommendations based on the findings of the assessment, IUCN invites parties to include the following: to develop or strengthen capacity for the early detection and rapid response to newly introduced alien species to prevent their establishment, and to enhance coordination at regional and international levels, making use of existing mechanisms where appropriate to improve the management of pathways of introduction, capacity building and knowledge sharing. IUCN supports the proposed recommendation in Substa/25/10 and welcomes the revised guidance set out in Annexes 1 to 6. We urge parties, other governments and relevant organisations to make use of the voluntary guidance. Chair, as noted in the annexes, the need for efficient, timely and high-quality, up-to-date standardised data will be critical in supporting progress towards Target 6, and that long-term funding is needed to support their proper operation and maintenance. Finally, as a member of the Interagency Liaison Group, IUCN welcomes the reconvening of the group and would like to highlight the important role this cross-sectoral group can play in supporting the implementation of Target 6. We therefore support the request to collaborate with the group included in the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, ACN. Last speaker now, Representative Woman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women's Caucus. Target 23 says that GBF should be implemented through a gender-responsive approach, and this item is around Target 6. The diverse provisions on CBD Substat 2510 should explicitly include and recognize indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth as decision makers and key agents of change, as well as holders of key knowledge. They should not merely serve as sources of information, but be integral and active participants in, as appropriate, all actions relevant to IAS. In parallel, indigenous peoples and local communities should be able to protect not only sacred spaces, but also their livelihoods, where they sustainably nurture biodiversity and harvest the benefits of biodiversity. For that, we suggest the concrete additions in document. In Annex 1, paragraph 3b, to add at the end of it, or the social, cultural, and environmental impacts to indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. Also in Annex 1, paragraph 6, to add at the end of it, women and youth. In Annex 4, both in paragraphs 5a and 5b, add women and youth after the reference to indigenous peoples and local communities. In Annex 4, risk analysis, in paragraph 3, after risk analysis, add and vulnerability analysis. And finally, in Annex 5, paragraph 6.1, add the word free after obtaining and before prior and informed consent. We kindly ask the Chair to ask parties to support for our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, women. Representative, I would like to ask first what is the appetite of the plenary in how to proceed, because suggestions made by last speaker are on the annexes. So I would like to know if the plenary would like to proceed to work on the different recommendations or suggestions to amend the recommendations part and not to open the annexes, or if there is a will to open the annexes for review. If that is the case, then we need to establish a contact group. If we limit, if some delegations can live with annexes as they are, in understanding that are voluntary guidance, and it's been a lot of work behind, peer review, forum, and many work, we can proceed to work with the Secretariat to produce a CRP. So I would like to know if there is any objections to proceed with a CRP and not to open the annexes, if there is flexibility and parties can live with that. If there is an opposition for not opening the annexes, please raise your hand. So I don't see hands open. And if that is the case, I can ask, so I see Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's overall agreement on many of the elements, but still we could benefit from some discussion on that. We don't expect this discussion to be lengthy, but maybe a small contact group will be useful in this regard. We have quite a few suggestions that we'd like to add to enhance the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. So there is a suggestion to open the annexes in a contact group. If this is the case, and I hope you have better memory than me regarding what the representative of women asked, I would like to know that if it's open the discussion in the annexes, if is any party open to support the suggestions we heard from the women representative. Please raise your hand to see. I see one hand. I cannot see which party is. Yes, okay. Is Trinidad or? Yeah. Yeah, I see more than one hand. Thank you very much, parties. So if this is the case, I will establish a contact group to deal with alien invasive species, but please to be aware that to limit, right now Secretary will start working on the different amendments to the recommendations section, and then I invite you to really have minimal amendments, those that are absolutely necessary on the different annexes, considering that there is a lot of work on this. I mean, this is not a new item in our convention. I was taking a look on the web page. We have already 100 technical publications in the convention, and number one was on invasive species in 2001. So we have more than 20 years already working in the convention. So this is not new, and this is very specific in some issues, what we have in the different annexes. So with that in mind, please be very practical on to minimize the changes only to those points that are really essential. The contact group then will be chaired by Ms. Senka Barudanovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also by Jean Bruno from Gabon, our colleagues, bureau members, and the secretary will inform us on the time and the route that this contact group can meet. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity for you to take a look on the non-papers that are already published in the website for monitoring frame for items 3A and 3B, right? For you to be prepared, because we're going to have an evening session for contact group on the monitoring framework. So with this, we close our deliberations on item 5. We still have 1.5 hours to finish item 6 and 7. I hope we can be more expeditious in our deliberations. So now we move to item 6 on sustainable wildlife management. I'll give the floor to Secretary to introduce item 6. I can give you a few seconds if you need to change documents or delegates.
Thank you, Chair. We're just completing our musical chairs and then we can get on with it. Thank you, Chair. For item 6, the Secretariat prepared document CBD-Substa/25/11, which contains an overview of other areas beyond the wild meat sector that may require complementary guidance, such as other geographical areas, species, and uses. The document was prepared pursuant to Decision 1523. The subsidiary body is invited to prepare draft recommendations along the lines outlined in the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Now I open for interventions on this document. I'll give the floor to South Africa, followed by Finland and Japan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. South Africa is speaking on behalf of the African Group. Africa would like to start by indicating that sustainable use and management of wildlife forms part of our cultural identity, and our unique wildlife resources forms a greater part of Africa's economies, which strengthen livelihoods of many indigenous people and local communities. Hence, we welcome the note prepared by the Executive Secretary to serve as a basis for this discussion. Mr. Chair, in terms of identification of areas beyond the wild meat sector that may require complementary guidance, Africa believes that this task relates to the adopted voluntary guidance on wild meat sector, which focused on some areas of terrestrial, tropical, and subtropical habitat, biomes, and ecosystems, excluding freshwater and marine fishes. Africa also believes that the IP-based assessment on sustainable use of wild species has identified status and trends of the use of wild species in general, and this should serve as a basis for this task, and the identified areas should align with the relevant goals and targets of the GBF, in particular goals A, B, and targets 4, 5, and 9. Mr. Chair, in terms of the geographical scope of the anticipated complementary guidance, this could be broadened to all areas, but we may also focus on temperate zone habitats and freshwater and marine habitats. Regarding other uses, alongside the wild meat is the potential for other uses of wild animals, such as ecotourism, and the use of their bioproducts, such as the hides, skin, fats, and the bones. In terms of the species, it is important to note that there is a large array of uses of wild species. Therefore, this should include species that provide protein, such as plants, insects, and the species that provide other uses, such as food, medicine, cosmetics, building materials, as well as the fuel. Mr. Chair, paragraph 45 of the note prepared by the Executive Secretary provides a basis for identification of such area, and we have made our proposals in sub-paragraphs F and J, details of which are included in our written statement. Mr. Chair, in terms of consideration for future work under the Convention, Africa supports the 5 thematic objectives included in the 2023 to 2025 work plan of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management to support the implementation of the GBF, which have been provided in paragraph 48. However, Africa would like to request access to the full report of the workshop that produced these thematic objectives, as many of us are not participating in this platform. Mr. Chair, in conclusions, in terms of the draft recommendations, Africa noted 3 elements suggested and has proposed additional elements of the recommendation, including text proposal to the 3 already suggested elements, just to strengthen the work under this item. Africa would also like to suggest merging of some of the elements from the IP-based recommendations for item, especially 4B, into the program of work under sustainable wildlife management for better coordination. And in the interest of time, we will not read them, but they are included in our written statement already submitted. We are looking forward to engage further on those draft recommendation input. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Now I'll give the floor to Finland, followed by Japan and Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 2 major issues to be raised here on this item 6. First, Finland would like to highlight that sustainable wildlife management is a broad and complex issue having a crucial component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It has clear linkages to the goals A and B and targets 4, 5 and 9. Thus, Finland warmly welcomes all further complementary guidance that help parties to implement those goals and targets. This also relates to the topic 3C dealt with yesterday and should be looked at together with the request and gap analysis. For this, we also highly support welcoming the identification of areas that may require complementary guidance. Besides the relevant complementary guidance already listed, we think that this list needs to be reviewed and further completed. Referring to this, we would like to stress the importance for wider perspective. Also noting, for example, that wildlife tourism and wildlife watching is a rapidly growing industry, but sustainable wildlife tourism will benefit and add wildlife value to the local people and communities if well organized and sustainably implemented. This perspective would also benefit more comprehensive rules and guidance, and this is important to include in the discussion and then in the list. To finalize the list of areas that might require complementary guidance, Finland proposes a new text in the para 51b in the recommendations to the COP. Secondly, Finland appreciates highly the IPBES work done concerning the sustainable use of wild species. The thematic assessment provides crucial background information for the implementation of the GBF. Thus, Finland proposes a new para of 51b bis to take into account the 7 suggested policy actions or key elements under the work on sustainable wildlife management as identified by the IPBES thematic assessment. Finland proposes also with a new text of para 51c to prepare draft complementary guidance documents on those areas that will support the effective implementation of the GBF. We have modified the suggested recommendations accordingly, and we have submitted them already to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Finland. Colleagues, just to let you know that I have more than 20 requests for the floor on this document that I believe is quite pretty straightforward, and still the document on climate change. I invite you to be very precise on the recommendations. We know sustainable use is also a very important issue. We've been dealing also with it for years. This is very precise. Otherwise, we will need to have a morning session in plenary instead of start working with contact groups. We have few days to finish all our works, and we should start contact groups as soon as possible, starting from tonight. So I hope in the rest of the time we have for this session, we can address both documents with your help. So let's be very precise on how to deal with this document to take a decision, please. Now I'll give the floor to Japan, followed by Turkey and Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Japan expresses its appreciation for the efforts made by the Secretariat to prepare the document. Japan generally supports the draft recommendation presented in the document. However, we have some comments and suggestions on the draft recommendations on the complementary guidance of C, small-scale fisheries, and D, bycatch. Japan understands the significance of sustainable small-scale fisheries because they contribute to local and global food security and also to livelihoods in coastal communities. Japan also recognizes the importance of minimizing bycatch of marine turtles, sharks, seabirds, and marine mammals. However, we should be mindful that there are already relevant guidelines and conservation management measures developed by FAO and other fishery regulatory bodies as described in paragraph 15 of the document. For example, the International Plan of Actions and other guidelines have been developed by FAO and already operationalized on these matters. In addition, There are conservation and management measures for sharks and resolutions on the conservation of marine turtles and mitigation the impact of seabirds, which are adopted in regional fisheries management organizations. Thus, Japan would like to suggest avoiding any duplications of work, considering the effective use of limited budget, time, and capacity of the Secretariat and parties. We consider it is critically important to develop and strengthen collaborative and complementary relationships with the relevant existing UN and other regulatory bodies, and make focused and coordinated effort to update existing guidance. We also believe the establishment of any new programs should be very carefully considered and strictly limited to the cases where critical gaps have been identified, and such gaps need to be filled from the viewpoint of the implementation of the GBF and achieve targets and goals in each country. Japan will submit our written comment on the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Now Turkey, followed by Canada and Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are so pleased to see that sustainable wildlife management has been involved in the agenda of this meeting. We once more realized how important it is to keep the delicate balance between wildlife and humans due to the rapidly increasing rates of zoonotic diseases. It is important for national and international policies to prioritize the integration of practices in terms of sustainable wildlife and game management. Governments should update their policies to ensure alignment with the principles of wildlife and game management. In this regard, it is believed that the development of complementary guidance would be very beneficial for parties to achieve sustainable wildlife management. We, however, would like to emphasize that the complementary guidance regarding illegal hunting of terrestrial animals should not focus on particular species with low intrinsic rates of population increase, but on all terrestrial animals affected by poaching. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Turkey. I'll give the floor to Canada, followed by Australia and India.
Thank you, Chair. Canada welcomes the present document, and we note actions under this agenda item represent, as Finland noted, an important contribution to the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Canada thanks the Secretariat for their preparation of the document that addresses one aspect of Decision 15/23, that is, the need for the completion of the work mandated under Decision 14/7, including identifying other areas beyond the wild meat sector that may require complementary guidance. Decision 15/23 further requests the Executive Secretary to work with relevant actors and stakeholders and relevant multilateral environmental organizations, and Canada would welcome further information on how those collaborations and synergies were achieved. In this regard, Canada has questions on the basis of the list of areas which may require complementary guidance provided in paragraph 45. Currently, the source or analysis on which this list is based is unclear. We are also concerned that there is duplication of work should the CBD proceed to draft additional voluntary guidance with activities or guidance that already exists or may be underway in other international organizations such as the FAO or CITES. Rather, Canada would request the Secretariat to provide further explanation on the scope of the assessment undertaken to identify the list, and broadly, the outcomes of their collaboration with relevant actors, stakeholders, and relevant multilateral environmental organizations and competent intergovernmental organizations, and present this information to the SBSTA prior to making a recommendation to the COP. It would be premature to recommend the preparation of any draft complementary guidance without first assuring the Conference of the Parties that there would not be duplication with the work of other competent organizations. We have some specific text suggestions to reflect our views, which we will provide to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. We look forward to see your suggestions also. Now I'll give the floor to Australia, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very brief. Australia supports the joint work of the CBD Secretariat and the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, and we see that the remit of the CBD seems to be getting broader as we continue on, and therefore work must be prioritised to focus on the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, as we heard through discussions on item 3 issues yesterday. As such, Australia would like to see in paragraph 51C the inclusion of subject to the availability of resources to ensure appropriate prioritisation of efforts. We understand the importance of this work, but would seek to avoid duplication of efforts, as many of these issues are under the remit of other conventions and agreements, such as CITES. We will submit our proposed amendment directly to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. Now I'll give the floor to India, followed by Brazil and EU.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India acknowledges the fact that the voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector was applicable only to some areas of terrestrial, tropical, and subtropical habitat, biomes, and ecosystems, and this may have to be extended to other areas. India urges CBD Secretariat to continue close collaboration with the IBES Secretariat to have a holistic understanding of the implications of the IBES thematic assessment on the sustainable use of wild species for GBF implementation. Further, we urge CBD Secretariat to collaborate with all relevant actors and stakeholders to promote the mainstreaming of the sustainable use of biodiversity, in particular of wild species, into all relevant sectors. India also welcomes the reference to collaborating and enhancing synergies in the field of sustainable use of wildlife with the relevant multilateral environmental agreements, including the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. The targets 4, 5, 9 of GBF covers wildlife from various angles, converging to achieve sustainable wildlife management. Striking a balance between the sustainable use, trade of wildlife, and simultaneously addressing overexploitation is a huge challenge. Inability to achieve success here would lead to biodiversity loss. While acknowledging and appreciating the work done by collaborative partnership on sustainable wildlife management in giving overview status of trends and possible future scenarios for sustainable wildlife management, we are of the view that unless holistic regulatory frameworks are put in place by the parties, the overexploitation of wildlife like fungi, cacti, cycads, orchids, medicinal plants, wild ornamental fish, recreational fishing may continue unabated. Lastly, India urges for the collecting required authentic data on collection harvesting of wild flora and fauna in different regions so as to have an updated picture to develop complementary guidance and also put in place regulatory framework by each party to the convention. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to Brazil, followed by EU and Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Chair. And Brazil takes note of document 25/11. From our perspective, the sustainable management of wildlife provides an opportunity to address the 3 objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner and to enhance the visibility of the central role of groups in vulnerable situations in conservation, restoration, sustainable use, and management efforts. At the same time, we would like to express our deep concern regarding the analysis on areas that might require complementary guidance as presented in Section 3. Throughout the GBF negotiation process, we have consistently emphasized that the implementation of the Convention and its new framework is a party-driven process, not a Secretariat-driven process. Therefore, we do not believe that it is the role of the Secretariat to identify specific areas without proper and inclusive consultation with contracting parties. Bearing this in mind, we fear that the proposed areas place a disproportionate emphasis on the issue of overexploitation rather than identifying pathways to promote sustainable use, which was precisely an innovation from the IPBES Sustainable Use Assessment. We will not be in a position to accept paragraph 45.g on new technology that could result in sustainable practices. This topic provides an unbalanced understanding of the role of innovation and technology and neglect the benefits from technological innovations that are needed to improve the resilience of sustainable use across different sectors. Section D.1.4 of the SPM of the IPBES assessment, for instance, clearly recognizes the role of technological innovations to reduce waste. We further believe addressing all new technology developments is not consistent with the mandate of the Convention. On a similar vein, we are not convinced of the added value of Area 45.E on destructive logging as we need more clarity on the consistency with the mandates of the UN Forum on Forests, the Committee on Forestry from FAO, and the International Organization for Tropical Timber. We further struggle to understand why some key topics of particular importance for developing countries that have been addressed by the IPBES assessment were not considered in the analysis by the Secretariat. In this regard, we draw attention to two specific topics that would benefit from further actions under the Convention: interlinkages between poverty alleviation strategies and policies and the sustainable use of wild species, and the social, economic, and environmental benefits of sustainable wild species-based products. Those actions would enhance the visibility of biodiversity within the 2030 Agenda and would contribute to addressing monitoring gaps related to Goal B and Target 9. In light of those concerns, we believe it would be premature to engage in the preparation of additional guidance, and the best way forward would be to invite contracting parties to a round of submissions on good practice for sustainable wildlife management. We once again would like to stress the importance of inclusivity and transparency in all the activities carried out by the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Now I'll give the floor to EU, followed by Saudi Arabia and Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. The European Union considers complementary guidance should only be developed for areas that are materially important for achieving the relevant targets of the GBF and for which there are no existing guidance. We identified several existing guidances that address the gaps identified in the Secretariat's assessments, at least partially. Once again, we should also keep in mind that guidances are only one of the possible tools, and we may well wish to prioritize other instruments to ensure full implementation of the elements in the GBF related to sustainable wildlife management. Hence, the European Union would like to support a subsidiary recommendation requesting further preparations on this issue in view of a solid decision at COP16. We are broadly supporting the suggestions included in the report of the experts meeting on the island of Wilm, and we will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Now I'll give the floor to Saudi Arabia, followed by Belgium and Switzerland.
مساء الخير. فيما يخص الفقرة رقم 4 من التوصيات.
Thank you very much. Document 11 under 4, we would like to highlight the need to specify geographic areas and different uses of fauna and which require recommendations. These areas are not limited by point 45 of this document. So the danger caused to birds, for example, is a very difficult issue. Therefore, we would like to see a modification in paragraph 1. The word particularly needs to be taken out and, amongst others, put in instead. And in the last paragraph, we should put in consultations with member states to decide upon priorities. And this is for sustainable development of these species and to contribute to priorities by member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now Belgium, followed by Switzerland.
Dear Mr. Chair, Belgium welcomed the outcomes and findings of the consultative workshop on sustainable wildlife management beyond 2020 and the results of the survey on sustainable wildlife management. We support using these references as initial basis to identify areas beyond the wild meat sector that might require complementary guidance. We would like to request the Executive Secretary to further finalize the list of areas that might require complementary guidance and submit it to COP16 for its consideration. We also support the intervention of Australia regarding the inclusion of subject of availability of resources. Belgium believes that a decision for the preparation of potential further guidance should be taken in coherence with the implementation of the elements in the Kunming-Montreal GBF related to the sustainable wildlife management. Wording to reflect these concerns was already sent to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Switzerland, followed by Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Chair.
Switzerland thanks the Executive Secretary and the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management for the work leading the document 25/11. We note that paragraph 45 of the documents under this item includes area beyond the wild meat sector that might require complementary guidance. In our view, many of the areas listed in paragraph 45 fall to a large extent under the mandates of other organizations and conventions like CITES, CMS, the Ramsar Convention, FAO, ITTO, and others. These areas listed would thus be best addressed in collaborative arrangement established among the conventions and organizations enumerated with the Secretariat of the CBD. In order to avoid duplication of work in these areas, Switzerland suggests requesting the Executive Secretary to bring the list included in paragraph 45 to the attention of the relevant biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant partners with a view of obtaining complementary guidance. Switzerland will send a concrete proposal to reflect this in the draft recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Now, Zimbabwe, followed by UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Zimbabwe notes the document prepared by the Secretariat and fully agrees with what South Africa has presented on behalf of the Africa Group. In addition to the areas identified in the thematic assessment report, which may require the development of complementary guidance in order to achieve sustainable wildlife management, we have some comments and recommendations. One, we recommend to the Conference of the Parties to focus more on strengthening international and domestic institutions, particularly focusing on practical empowerment of IPOCs, like including them in decision-making structures at the possible highest levels, ensuring access to financial resources from biodiversity conservation by communities, especially women and youth. We remain surprised, Mr. Chair, that despite well-documented recognition of the importance of inclusion of IPOCs in conservation, it still remains difficult to establish mutually and financially beneficial linkages between rural communities and international institutions and governments to date. We recommend that the COP mobilize resources towards understanding the values of different local communities to ensure integration into mainstream economies, incorporate indigenous and local knowledge systems into biodiversity conservation strategies, both at international and national levels, as well as addressing in earnest the drivers of over-exploitation, of which poverty is the biggest one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Now UK, followed by Burundi.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for presenting this document and for their hard work in advancing Decision 1523. We also extend our thanks to the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management for their offer to assist countries in ensuring the legal, sustainable and safe use and trade of wildlife, as well as the other objectives outlined in their 2023 to 2025 work plan. This invaluable support should greatly aid parties in achieving the Global Biodiversity Framework. We are also grateful to the partnership for signalling their availability to undertake the future work as outlined in paragraphs 46 and 47. We welcome the publication of the IPBES thematic assessment on the sustainable use of wild species. This comprehensive assessment fills critical knowledge gaps and will provide a robust evidence base for identifying areas where additional complementary guidance may be required as we move forward. Regarding the recommendation in paragraph 51, we believe the language can be strengthened to be more explicit about the process and timeline for developing further guidance. We propose the following process and timeline: a direct invitation to the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management to undertake the necessary analysis, a request to the Executive Secretary to compile a list of areas requiring additional guidance which draws on the analysis conducted by the Collaborative Partnership. This list would then be submitted to COP16 for parties to consider, as proposed by Belgium. A recommendation that the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting request the Executive Secretary to produce a draft guidance with the support of the Collaborative Partnership and input from other relevant stakeholders, including parties. Finally, a request that the Executive Secretary submit the guidance to a future meeting of SBSTTA in advance of COP17. In addition to clarifying the process and timeline, we also propose that the 7 key elements of effective policy for sustainable use of wild species be taken into consideration in both the analysis conducted by the collaborative partnership and the draft guidance itself. Finally, we recommend that consideration is given as to how to make any future guidance as user-friendly as possible to ensure that there is maximum uptake by parties and other stakeholders. We have submitted these proposed amendments in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. Now Burundi, followed by New Zealand.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you so much, sir. Burundi would like to back the statement made by the African Group, presented by South Africa regarding the use and management of wildlife. We'd also like to back the proposal of including species which provide protein and other uses such as nutrition, medicine, and so forth, without, of course, forgetting species which provide ecosystemic services such as honeybees and so further, pollinators, and other species which can contribute to the circular economy in addition to the use of wildlife as wild meat. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for the brief intervention. Now New Zealand, followed by, let me see, because my screen is small, Mexico and Spain.
New Zealand recalls the original intent of the CBD voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector as addressing the threat of unsustainable harvesting of wild bushmeat in specific geographic regions. We acknowledge the valuable and important work already completed on this agenda item, but want to echo the view of Finland and highlight that developing complementary guidelines for other areas may be more appropriate considered within the wider programme of work review discussed under item 3C. Like Japan, Switzerland, Canada and others, we also want to ensure that the work being undertaken by the CBD is not a duplication of existing work. New Zealand recognises multiple international organisations that have developed standards and work stream for the areas outlined in paragraph 45, and in our view, the focus of the CBD should be considering opportunities to collaborate and add value to these existing work programs across other international fora and to avoid duplication. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Now Mexico, followed by Spain. Mexico.
Gracias, señor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mexico is in favour of continuing with the development of complementary guidelines which will promote the sustainable wildlife management and to look at the priorities and needs. In that context, it's necessary to have chains of value chains, so that we are able to make sure that we look at the benefits of the sustainable use of wildlife management, so that the use and trade of wildlife is always legal, sustainable and traceable. We consider it to be important to not limit ourselves to only a few commercial issues. We need to have proper guidelines for the collection of animals in general, so we're in favour of us continuing to work on complementary manners, and we will be sending our observations on the text in written form to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Mexico.
Thank you, Mexico. Says the Chair, I now give the floor to Spain.
Seguido de la Federación Rusa.
Followed by the Russian Federation.
Señor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, Spain would like to highlight the following issues. The list of areas that could require further guidelines for sustainable wildlife management could be completed and should be more precise. And so that we always make sure we have resources, then this should be carried out by the Secretariat with the support and collaboration on sustainable wildlife management for its consideration and prioritization at COP16, and we propose that this be reflected in paragraph B of the recommendation. With regard to paragraph C, we should ask the Secretariat to prepare complementary guidelines for sustainable wildlife management in those areas which could require it, so that these support in an effective way the global sustainable management of wildlife, and these complementary measures should be presented to Substa before COP16. And in conclusion, Spain believes it appropriate to include in the recommendations a new paragraph B bis with the essential elements taking into account the development of policies that support sustainable wildlife management, and as we're enumerating paragraph 25 of Substa 25.5. And we will send all of these proposals for amendments in writing to the Secretary. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Spain. Says the Chair, I now give the floor to the Russian Federation, followed by the DRC.
Спасибо. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now, we believe that the movement in determining other tasks in the field of sustainable wildlife management, which in our view is broader than just use of wildlife outside the topic of wild meat sector, to be positive. We welcome the efforts of partners on the sustainable wildlife management and the assessment of information in identifying gaps and shortcomings in this field. We consider it useful to continue our participation, the participation of CBD in this partnership, and efforts to identify gaps and the preparation of new guidelines. We'd also like to convey our gratitude to the FAO for their efforts in coordinating, as well as the role of the Secretariat in fostering partnerships. As a number of colleagues have already noted, we must carry out an additional analysis and assessment of existing instruments, including within the framework of other international processes, and carry out a prioritization. This is something that states will have to do rather than the Secretariat. This was said already, including amongst the 7 directions which are indicated in the document, and in full compliance and keeping with the priorities and tasks of the Global Framework Program, including issues of conflicts between humans and wildlife, and the use of wildlife for medicinal purposes, and continued work on the preparation.
Told that there is no translation into Spanish. Can technicians verify that we count with that? So maybe, I don't know for how long.
So what you
It's
like
working
me
now? Can you go back a little bit in your statement? I don't know if the whole statement of the Russian Federation was not translated. No hubo traducción al español, toda la intervención de...
The whole of that statement of the Russian Federation, it seems, was not interpreted into Spanish. I'm so sorry. Please, could we ask you to...
But are you sure translation is there now? That I not do it for 3 times. Okay, okay, okay. Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Let me start again from the beginning. Very well. Well, craving all of your indulgences for the additional time we'll spend on this. So, we note as positive the fact that we finally in our convention have moved beyond the parameters of looking at wildlife only as wild meat, but we're always looking at other sectors of the management of wildlife, more than just its use. We welcome the participants and the partnerships on the sustainable use of wildlife, and we would like the CBD to continue to cooperate with its partners and continue the joint work on identifying new priorities and the preparation of new guidelines and so forth. We also expressed our gratitude to the FAO for efforts in coordinating the work and the role of its Secretariat in partnerships. We noted that in keeping with other countries, we would like to see additional assessments of existing instruments existing in other international processes, including amongst the 7 directions which are highlighted in this document. Of course, there has to be prioritization, and this is prioritization which was backed by other countries, and it will have to be carried out by the states rather than the Secretariat, and it will have to remain in keeping with the tasks and objectives of the Global Framework Program. And such work, of course, can be carried out in partnership with other stakeholders. Now, in terms of prioritization, we could use the existing instruments in the convention, the online instruments, and we could submit to the Conference of the Parties the necessary information. We liked a number of proposals which were made by the United Kingdom, which included concrete steps on how we can make progress. Now, mindful of the constraints in terms of resources, the Secretariat's resources, work on such guidelines could perhaps be a 2 or 3 staged approach. I don't believe the Secretariat can provide everything and prepare everything in one go. Simply not possible. So what we need is a clear program on how we're going to do this, on who is going to do this. And again, here, the UK's proposals are most useful ones. And finally, I'd like to remind all of you of our discussions on item 4 on our agenda. Now, we propose that in this document, in the recommendations, we should note, indeed underscore, the importance of the IPBES assessment on the sustainable wildlife management. And we propose that we should take document 4, or paragraph 4 from document 6 and move it here and include it in our recommendations, as was proposed by Canada. We believe that this will bolster and strengthen the document, add it additional gravitas, and will promote the results which IPBES wants to achieve, and will make the whole document more serious as a whole. Thank you.
Spasiba, Russia. Now I'll give the floor to Tuvalu, followed by France and Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tuvalu is speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island countries present here at the SBSTTA-25, namely Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Tonga, and Vanuatu. Mr. Chair, Pacific Island countries are renowned for their rich biodiversity and unique ecosystems, which are home to a wide variety of flora and fauna found nowhere else on Earth. As we gather for the 25th meeting of the SBSTA on the Convention on Biological Diversity, it is imperative to address the critical issue of wildlife management in these countries. Effective wildlife management strategies are essential to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of the region's natural resources, while also considering the socio-economic needs of local communities. Chair, we would like the Secretariat to note the following. 1, we welcome and support the recommendations under CBD-SBSTA-25/11, as well as the thematic assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. 2, Pacific Island countries are often transit points or destinations for illegal wildlife trade due to their biodiversity and proximity to major markets. This trade puts immense pressure on vulnerable species, leading to population declines and ecological imbalances. 3, though the Pacific region does not have a large variety of wildlife, we recognize that species such as terrestrial mammals and plants in the Pacific Islands are facing extinction due to habitat loss, invasive alien species, and climate change impacts. Ocean-bound wildlife is susceptible to environmental threats, especially endemic species that are restricted to a single island or a small group of islands. Among other things, this remoteness makes migrating to another landmass nearly difficult and impossible. Finally, Pacific Island countries often have limited financial resources, technical expertise, and institutional capacity for effective wildlife management. This hampers the implementation of comprehensive conservation strategies, including monitoring, research, and enforcement efforts. We look forward to global financial support for small island states, which would be critical to the success of wildlife management in the Pacific Island countries. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tuvalu. I give the floor to DRC, that was before, and then France and Norway.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, sir, for affording me the floor. Now, The DRC strongly endorses the statement made by South Africa on behalf of the African Group. Sir, today is the Global Day of Nutrition. Wildlife and other forestry products are, for the populations of African states, and especially the DRC, one of the most important sources of protein and indeed of income. Most households in the forested regions of the DRC mostly and often exclusively depend on wildlife for their very subsistence. And they maintain close and deep links with wildlife. These populations who live from forests, who live in forests and live with forests, should be involved in identifying the 6 Gs and areas to be considered as priorities, and in determining which actions need to be implemented. Having said this, their growing poverty is a threat to wildlife, because these populations, deprived of everything, mostly indigenous people and local communities, possessing no other ways to earn an income and to survive, consider the forests to be their supermarkets, their pharmacies, their chemists, and their areas of cultural identity. In other words, promoting the sustainable management of wildlife is equal to providing support for these communities, for the organization of sustainable hunting, and a support for alternative activities such as livestock raising, sustainable agriculture, which is environmentally responsible in nature, as well as trade and commerce. The paragraphs 30 to 35 of the document we're currently considering mentions forest use as a threat to the sustainable use of wildlife. To tackle this, we need to come up with new sustainable energy in rural areas which have no other forms of income. This needs to be taken into account when one discusses the sustainable management of wildlife. Africa possesses a great deal of experience in this field, and the reports of the various partners and stakeholders, including FAO, LC4, the WUCS, and CIRAT, are all very telling in this respect. And for this reason, they need to be included in our work. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to France, followed by Norway and Argentina.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, sir. France, like a great many other parties, welcomes the thematic assessment of the sustainable wildlife management of IPBES and welcomes the key messages contained in this assessment and underscore their relevance for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework. We'd like to underscore a number of points which are included in document 25/11. Now, there is a list of fields in this document which might require additional guidelines, and we have comments on this. For example, listed in the additional guidelines, we have the non-sustainable use of land-based animals, aware that the trade in pets, whether legal or illegal, impacts millions of animals and is not only limited to land-based animals. We consider that the use of the word land limits its application, including to marine animals. So we would prefer to have the word land deleted in favor of wildlife. Now, we have the following guidelines. We have traditional partially sustainable fisheries in certain part of the world. We'd like more clarification on this. We back the comment made by Turkey considering the guideline on the current wording, which is non-sustainable hunting, especially for species whose growth rate is weak and areas where hunting is not well managed. And we propose that this item be simplified. We simply have non-sustainable hunting. The assessment of sustainability of hunting must take into account the characteristics of the population, including their intrinsic growth rate. We will send you all of our detailed comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, France. Let's proceed with Norway and Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. Norway would like to express our appreciation for the work of the Secretariat, and we generally support the recommendations of the draft decision. However, in assessing new areas that need complementary guidelines, we would like to support the interventions of Japan, Canada, Australia, and others on avoiding duplication of work. This is particularly relevant in relation to small-scale fisheries and bycatch, where FAO and others have developed guidelines, but also to some other topics. We also support the proposal from the UK and others on including in the guidelines the 7 suggested policy actions to support the sustainable use of wild species from the IPBES assessment. Thank you.
That was brief, thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Argentina, followed by last party, Iraq.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you so much, sir. Argentina wishes to underscore the fact that the sustainable management of wildlife species is part and parcel of the fundamental activities in terms of the conservation of biodiversity. Therefore, to achieve the ultimate objectives of the CBD and the global Kunming-Montreal framework, Argentina wishes to underscore the importance of the recent publication regarding the sustainable wildlife management. It's an IPBES publication. We welcome what is contained in the summary to be submitted to the decision makers. The implementation of the objectives of the global framework on sustainable development must therefore take place mindful of these recommendations. In our view, these recommendations are sufficient for the conservation and sustainable use of wildlife species. On this point, ladies and gentlemen representatives, Argentina wonders whether there is a real need to set up a long elaboration process with a great many additional guides and guidelines, which might represent overlap and indeed duplication compared to what is carried out by CITES or IPBES or the FAO. We would like this not to be the case. We must focus on the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and as other colleagues said, such as Canada, Australia, Brazil, Norway, all said before us. Therefore, Argentina will not make any proposals for recommendations to the COP on this agenda item. However, we will closely consider and study all of the proposals made by our colleagues. Thank you, sir.
Doy la palabra a Iraq.
I'm going to give the floor to Iraq now.
تحية طيبة. باختصار شديد.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to touch on the recommendation on biodiversity regarding wildlife species, which did not take into account the international and regional dimensions. All it did is refer to regional and national aspects. And I believe that these issues are extremely important ones because, for example, a number of species are currently threatened with extinction, and we need to review all of the parameters involved in the sustainable management of this wildlife to ensure that this does not occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Iraq. With this, we finish with requests from parties. Now we will proceed with observers and decide how to proceed. Can I see the list? I'll give the floor to CITES first.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, I have the honour of addressing this plenary on behalf of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management in my capacity as Vice Chair. CPW is a partnership of 13 international organisations with differing but complementary mandates and programmes on the sustainable use of wildlife resources that was established following a decision at CBD COP11. The CPW partners stand ready to continue to support and help strengthen sustainable wildlife management. During our recent annual meeting in Rome, CPW partners approved a work plan for 2023 to 2025, encompassing a diverse range of collaborative initiatives, including those closely associated with CBD processes. These include contributing to a gap analysis to support CBD Decision 15/23, implementation on sustainable wildlife management. Secondly, providing technical support for integrating sustainable wildlife management into NBSAPs. And thirdly, contributing to the development of a methodology for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Sustainable Use of Wild Species Indicator for GBF Targets 5 and 9, and a Human-Wildlife Conflict Indicator for Target 4. We firmly believe that the collaborative efforts among CPW partners in recent years have established a robust foundation to contribute to the work of the CBD, and we look forward to the recommendations relating to sustainable wildlife management emanating from this Substa meeting. In conclusion, we extend a cordial invitation to all parties and observers to join the CPW side event this evening at 18:15 in CR9 Africa Room, and this event will serve as the official launch of our work plan and offer insights into the various activities embedded within it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to FAO, followed by CMS.
Thank you, Chair. This statement refers to paragraph 45 on the need for development of complementary guidance to achieve sustainable wildlife management in specific areas. FAO agrees with a statement made by Japan, Canada, Brazil, and Norway, and reiterates the need to avoid duplication of work, to strengthen complementarities with relevant UN and other regulatory bodies, and to promote focused and coordinated efforts to update existing guidance and create new ones. The GBF offers a great opportunity to enhance synergies across regional and international bodies, including fisheries bodies, farming, and forestry organizations, by investing in communication and implementing globally negotiated agreements and existing tools. These include, for example, guidance for ensuring harvests are sustainable from all fisheries, including small-scale fisheries, while reducing bycatch fishing mortality, and guidance to halt illegal logging practices and enhance sustainable forest management. As mentioned in our statement on document 25/4, FAO will shortly launch a biodiversity knowledge hub with policy and technical tools to assist countries in implementing the framework, including instruments and tools to support sustainable wildlife management. FAO remains at the disposal of the plenary to further contribute to the gap analysis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, FAO. Now I'll give the floor to CMS.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the global agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of migratory species, CMS plays a major role in addressing the management and conservation of wild species of animals and their habitats. We have a long list of mandates, effective practices, and interventions, scientific studies, and guidance that should be brought to bear on this topic for a wide range of species, including avian, aquatic, and terrestrial taxa. For instance, CMS is doing significant work on wild meat, not only on terrestrial wild meat with a global study, but also on taking of avian and aquatic species for wild meat. We will also be launching at our COP14 in February next year the first ever State of the World's Migratory Species Report, prepared with UNEP WCMC. The report has some alarming findings that should be considered in the work of the CBD on this topic. For instance, It finds that 7 in 10 CMS-listed species are affected by overexploitation, 89% of Appendix 1 species and 68% of Appendix 2 species. For terrestrial and avian species, it found that the vast majority of such overexploitation is a result of intentional exploitation. Importantly, much of the taking of CMS species is not for international trade. Over 3/4 of the CMS Appendix 1 taxa were identified as harvested for domestic use. The report goes on to provide clear and pragmatic solutions, and CMS COP14 will be adopting decisions related to these issues. As concluded in the IPBES report on sustainable use, billions of people rely and benefit from the use of wild species of plants and animals, but it also found that overexploitation is one of the greatest threats to wild species. Thus, identifying and enhancing the conditions that need to be in place to ensure that taking is legal and sustainable are key to reversing these trends. We stand ready to work with the CBD and other entities on guidance as well as other measures to ensure that targets 4, 5, and 9 of the KMGBF are achieved. We will be discussing these and other issues tomorrow at a lunchtime side event that I invite you to attend, and I also hope to see many of you at COP14. Thank you.
Thank you, CMS. I'll give the floor to Peru.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Peru recognizes the efforts that have been made by the Secretariat in providing us with the present document to be a complement to 14.7 and taking into account the conclusions on sustainable wildlife management after 2020 and the results that have been found. The most concerning issues for Peru are under paragraph C, that we are assured that it's important to achieve these recommendations. For this, we need funds in order to have updated and permanent information and to promote the international platforms which are specialized on the matter so they're able to share information relating to through the standards of information sharing. Under paragraph D, we would like to ask for a link between the stakeholders. They can assist and strengthen countries on more knowledge about fauna and flora. Peru is in agreement with the recommendation for this document and that we should work in the best of normative frameworks, particularly those which relate to sustainable wildlife management with birds, so that we can make sure we continue and have this reflected in international instruments. Thank you so much, sir.
I still have 4 requests from observers. I will invite them to take only 2 minutes in order to finish. We have very little time and we have not addressed yet the last document. So that means we will need to have a plenary tomorrow. And this is against the time available for contact groups. Please be very precise. I'll give the floor to IPLCs, followed by Women and NGO 195.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. IIFB is mindful on the reciprocal relationship between nature and people, making sustainable wildlife management an important priority for indigenous peoples and local communities. Actions taken on sustainable wildlife management must respect and support customary sustainable use of wildlife by indigenous peoples and local communities. In this regard, IIFB proposes the addition of the following words at the end of paragraph 51C to read, recommend to the Conference of Parties to request that the Executive Secretary, with the support of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, to prepare draft complementary guidance on those areas, adding, ensuring respect and support for customary sustainable use on wildlife by indigenous peoples and local communities. IFB requests parties for support in this recommendation. IFB have submitted these recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any party supporting the suggestion? Please raise your hand. I don't see any party. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Representative Women.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Joyce Peshu from Kenya, speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. In the realm of sustainable wildlife management, it is paramount to acknowledge that gender issues are frequently overlooked or insufficiently addressed, even with the community-driven efforts. We must recognize that these gender dimensions are pivotal to and their neglect can undermine the very essence of effective wildlife management. For that, we urge parties to ensure reference on gender consideration in the governance of wild species, with a particular focus on the distribution of costs and benefits in line with targets 22 and 23 of the framework. Since billions of people around the planet rely on and benefit from the use of wild species with a particular focus of indigenous people, local communities, and women, it is critical to include a gender dimension in tackling critical challenges on sustainable wildlife management. Including human-wildlife conflict, unsustainable and illegal trade, tenure rights, poverty, and food security, recognizing their diverse impacts on women and girls, and the potential to perpetuate gender inequalities that require attention and resolution. In this context, our concrete recommendations on these items are: in Section 3, areas that might require complementary guidance, para 45, to add a new subpara H that reads as follows: integrate gender-responsive approaches by recognizing and supporting the roles, rights, needs, and contributions of women, particularly in activities such as the collection, processing, and trade of wild species. Following, in para 46, to add women, youth, and other stakeholders after indigenous peoples and local communities. Additionally, we want to bring your attentions to the urgency of the recognition and acknowledgement of women among other constituents as custodians of biodiversity and partners in its conservation, restoration, and sustainable use, as well as the fact that women and girls rely on sustainable use of wild species in most cases. Underscore the collection of gender disaggregated data is a pivotal step towards integrating
Please
gender
conclude
consideration
and go straight to your suggestion, please.
into wildlife management. We kindly request the chair to ask the parties to support our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any party supporting suggestion by Representative Women? I see one hand, Cameroon. Thank you. Now, 2 minutes for NGO 195. Last NGO 191.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of China Biodiversity Conservation Green Development Foundation. I would like to remind all of the parties that whilst we've heard about sustainable wildlife management in the context of wild meat, this is missing the fact that many species are traded for other purposes, including ornamentation, fashion, and for the pet trade, and many of these fall outside the scope of any of the UN conventions. For example, if we consider the case of reptiles, nearly 37% of species are in trade, and yet only 9% fall under the CITES Convention. For amphibians, 17% are in trade, 2.5% fall within any of the CITES appendices. It is paramount, as illustrated by IPBES, that we consider the sustainable trade of all species rather than those that fall within the remits of existing conventions, and yet, with the exception of America, only Australia and America are countries that currently database the import and export of species that fall outside CITES appendices. Without data on the trade of species, we cannot measure the sustainability. And so we would encourage all parties to think of more standardized ways to database the export and import of species in trade so we can develop sustainable baselines. Lastly, there is no binary indicator for Target 5, and the only headline indicator is fish stocks, meaning that for the majority of species in trade, we have no headline indicator to understand the impact of trade on species. And this is paramount to the conservation of species that are currently impacted by unsustainable trade, but for which we have no data to ascertain what that impact looks like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ya había cerrado la lista, pero Colombia...
I had to close the list, but Colombia has asked for the floor. Please be brief. Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to say that we support the proposal made by the indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you very much. Thank you. We will do so.
Bueno, con esto...
With this, we have completed our deliberations on this document. There have been many comments on the document, many supporting the recognition of the best assessment and some of the actions proposed within that assessment, much discussion on complementary actions in so much as guidelines are concerned for the sustainable wildlife management, many appeals for us to avoid duplication, particularly pre-existing work in under other organizations such as CITES and the FAO, and some recommendations, some specific recommendations to filter these recommendations and to present some of this in the next SBSTTA meeting before COP16. We recall the focus on exploitation, overexploitation, and also for promoting the sustainable use of wildlife. Numerous comments have been received. I will request the Secretariat that we work on drafting a CRP document that will seek to reflect the majority of the comments so that we have an integrated basis for us to continue on our deliberations in the best way possible for us to continue our work. We just have a few more minutes. If we could just wait for another 10 minutes, I would like at least to present the next document on climate change. And with that, therefore, we move on now to the next item on the agenda. I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce item 7 on the agenda on biodiversity and climate change. And now I'll speak in English. My notes are in English.
Given that UNEA, UNEA mandated consultations on nature-based solutions, recently concluded its final meeting here last week, and the topic is relevant to, while not limited to, this is very important, to item 7 on biodiversity and climate change. I would like to invite one of the co-chairs of the consultations to give a brief overview of the process to our information. So I will give the floor to Ms. Sikeade Ekbuwalo of Nigeria. Is she around? She requests to. So please. Yeah, she's going to the seat of Nigeria. Microphone to Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good day to you all. distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. You may recall the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly held in February 2022 in Nairobi adopted the resolution 5/5 on 2nd of March 2022, which is on nature-based solutions for supporting sustainable development. The resolution provides the first multilaterally agreed definition on nature-based solutions as actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. It also requested the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme to convene intergovernmental consultations to further support implementations of nature-based solutions as defined in the resolution. In October 2022, Dr. Leila Benali, the President of the United Nations Environment Assembly, appointed Her Excellency Mrs. Giovanna Valverde Stark, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to UNEP and UN Habitat, and I as the co-chair of the Intergovernmental Consultations on Nature-Based Solutions. These consultations were convened between May and October this year, with the final in-person consultations concluding this past Friday. The co-chairs have developed draft recommendations for progressing nature-based solutions and are currently writing a co-chair summary which will reflect the full range of views expressed in the consultations, including divergencies and diversity of all opinions. We will also reflect the rich information from the regional consultations in the co-chair summary. We have heard hundreds of views expressed during these consultations. There is general consensus on the importance and value of nature-based solutions and the importance of social and environmental safeguards, recognizing the rights and interests of indigenous peoples, and on measuring costs and benefits, including non-economic costs and benefits. We have also heard that there is a need for greater clarity on standards and criteria. This is needed for several reasons, including to identify good or best practices. We recognize the importance of placing nature-based solutions in the context of sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals, and this will be reflected in the written outcomes of these consultations. In order to establish a consistent and common understanding of nature-based solutions across the multilateral environmental agreement, we are recommending that parties to the various agreements which use the concept or term nature-based solutions consider ways to promote coordination in their approaches to this topic, including synergizing efforts being taken under different bodies/agreements. We look forward to working with you all on this important topic. Once again, my gratitude to SBSTTA Chair for the opportunity to give a reflection on the process of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions. I thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, this is considering that this topic is relevant, while it's not limited to what we're going to be dealing with climate change, but to be aware of the consultations last week here in Nairobi. Now I'll like to give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce item 7. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. COP Decision 15/30 requested the SBSTTA to further review the issue of biodiversity and climate change on the basis of views and information submitted by parties, other governments and international organisations, as well as relevant scientific and technical information on biodiversity and climate change. On item 7, the Secretariat has prepared document SBSTTA-25/12 Biodiversity and Climate Change, This document contains a brief summary of the submissions and views and information, and the subsidiary body is invited to consider the draft recommendations provided in document 25/12. In addition, the subsidiary body has before it an information document related to this agenda item, CBD/Substa/25/inf/2, which contains a more comprehensive synthesis of the views and information received on biodiversity and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For this, just give me a second to have a quick consultation in how to proceed. Thank you very much for your time. So we will finish our deliberations now, and I'd like to remind you that for this evening, the contact group on the monitoring framework on 3A will start at 7:30 until 11. Please remind that if you leave the venue, you can come back to the venue only until 8 p.m., but not after. If you go to get dinner, you should come before. Otherwise, you will not be able to enter into the venue until 11. And the idea, well, the non-paper, as you know, is already published. That will be the basis for deliberations. And tomorrow morning, we will start also with 2 contact groups, one on invasive species and the other one on monitoring, planning, and reporting. And regarding when we will reconvene the plenary to continue with climate change, we will let you know if we'll be in the afternoon or later, so look at the screens, because we need to arrange logistical considerations. We were expecting to finish today to do full day tomorrow for contact groups, but I'm sure there's going to be a number of interventions that will take some time. So please be aware of the screens, but at least the works for tonight, for this evening, and tomorrow morning are clear. We need to start our work on the contact groups as soon as possible. I don't know if Secretary has any additional comments.
Thank you, Chair. Please be informed that the contact group, which was going to be held at CR1, is now going to be held in CR3 and 4 combined room, so just next door. And for tomorrow, it will take place at CR1 as originally allocated, but please also be informed that the non-paper, which was issued this afternoon as version 1, will have to issue within next 1 hour, next 5 minutes as a version 2, because we missed some important information. So we apologize for this inconvenience, but please download version 2 for tomorrow's contact group. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on an entirely different issue, as you know, this meeting will be followed by the meeting of the resumed COP and MOPS. to complete the elections and to to adopt the report, formally adopt the reports of COP15, MOP 10 and MOP 4. To do this, of course, we need a full quorum. Actually, we've had very good cooperation of parties in providing their credentials, but there are still some parties that need to either get their credentials or a note verbal validating the credentials that were available in Montreal. My colleagues have been chasing individual countries in this respect, but let me just also urge those parties that have not yet completed the process of getting their credentials or their note verbal to do so that we can proceed smoothly on Thursday afternoon with those meetings. Of course, a full report on credentials will be made available at the beginning of the COP on Thursday, and the Bureau will be meeting, the COP Bureau will be meeting Thursday morning to prepare that report. So I'm just seeking your cooperation in that. If there are any questions, then my colleagues Woku and Inonge are available to address them. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So the meeting is adjourned.